Hi. My name is Madeline Ray, I'm 30 years old, and last month I watched my parents smile as they handed my husband a box that nearly took the air out of my lungs. Noah, my husband, thought it was just a birthday present. He laughed, thanked them, and looked at me like, see? They're trying. But all I could do was stare at the box. Not because it was beautifully wrapped, although it was, with that same ivory paper my mother always used for special occasions, but because I already knew what was inside. I knew it by the weight of the box, the size, the angle of her smile. I had held that box before. I had buried it. Literally. 3 years ago. In another city. During a time I never talk about. My hands were shaking, and when Noah reached to open it, I blurted, louder than I meant to, "Don't touch it." The room went silent. My mother blinked, my father's eyes narrowed. And Noah, poor Noah, looked completely caught off guard. I forced a smile and said something like, "Sorry, just." I thought it might be fragile. But I was already spiraling. I excused myself, took the box, and walked down the hall to our bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor staring at it for 15 minutes before I opened it. And there it was. My grandfather's watch. The same watch my parents told me had been lost in the move. The same one my grandfather gave me in secret 2 weeks before he died, slipping it into my hand with the words, "Don't let them take this. You've earned it more than they ever did." I remember sobbing when I couldn't find it. And I remember the look on my mother's face when she helped me search. The fake sympathy. The gentle suggestion that maybe I'd misplaced it. But I knew. Somewhere deep in my gut, I knew. And now here it was, in a box, wrapped as a present for my husband, as if it was theirs to give. As if my grandfather's last act of rebellion didn't matter. I didn't open the bedroom door for hours. And when I finally came out, dinner was over. Noah was confused. My parents were smug. And I smiled. Because something in me had snapped. Quietly, like a tight string pulled too far. I was done playing the good daughter. Done swallowing the lies. And I was going to get it all back, not just the watch, but everything they ever stole. Starting that night, I didn't bring the watch back out. I placed it in the small velvet-lined drawer under my jewelry box, not to hide it, but to remind myself every morning of what they'd done. Of what I'd let them get away with. For years. Growing up, my parents never hit me. That would have been too obvious. No, their abuse came in compliments, with hooks, in gifts that doubled as chains, in threats so polite you'd almost thank them. "We just want what's best for you, Maddie. That's why we're so involved." Involved? They chose my college, dictated who I could date, and once called my boss to ask if I was managing my workload okay. I was 24. When I met Noah, it was like breathing real air for the first time. He didn't try to control me. He listened. He laughed at my sarcasm, not scolded it. We moved to another city, hours away from my parents, and for 7 years I thought distance would be enough. But poison doesn't need proximity. They'd send cards, packages, holiday invitations, each one carefully worded to sound warm. But every sentence carried the same quiet message, "We still own you." And I responded every time, like a fool. Until the watch. That broke something sacred. And they knew it. I could see it on their faces. My mother was practically glowing. Like she'd finally won. But here's the part she didn't know, I'd already started unraveling their empire. Months before the birthday dinner, I had begun digging. Financial records. Property. Inheritance. I found things they never thought I'd find. Hidden trusts. Donations to private accounts. Paper. Trails that didn't quite disappear the way they'd hoped. I wasn't just their daughter. I was my grandfather's only grandchild. And he had left breadcrumbs for me. Carefully placed clues and letters, old notebooks, even photographs with dates circled in red. The watch was the final piece. My mother thought she was giving it away to hurt me. But what she actually gave me was the key. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Noah left early, still a little confused by the night before, but I kissed him goodbye and promised to explain everything later. And I would, but not yet. First, I opened my laptop and started comparing the watch to the photos I had archived from my grandfather's attic. Same crack on the glass. Same engraving. The initials were so faint they looked like scratches. MR, my name, not his. He'd customized it for me. It had never been my father's, no matter how many times they claimed heirloom. My grandfather bypassed his own son and gave it to me. And that made it dangerous. I took out the notebook where I'd been tracking their movements for the last few months, bank transfers, estate dealings, names of shell companies I didn't understand at first, but now had mapped out like constellations. My mother had been quietly moving assets into her name. My father had been funneling money into a foundation registered to a P.O. box in Vermont. I had printed copies of everything. Labeled and filed. I didn't plan to go to the police. Not yet. No, what I had in mind was quieter. More precise. Revenge didn't have to be loud to be complete. I scheduled a lunch with my parents the following Saturday. Just to clear the air, I said sweetly on the phone. My mother acted surprised. My father said, "That's our girl," and I nearly laughed out loud. They had no idea. I wore beige. Not my usual color, but something about fading into the background helped me stay calm. We sat outside on the patio of a French cafe they loved to flaunt on social media. My mother ordered wine, my father a rare steak, and I stuck to coffee. So, she began, smoothing her napkin. "Are we okay, now?" I looked her in the eye. Almost. And then I handed her an envelope. Inside were copies of the deeds she'd hidden, the tax forms she'd falsified, and a letter from my grandfather, dated 3 months before he died, stating explicitly that the watch, the land, and the old house were mine, and only mine, upon his passing. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read. My father paled when he saw the bottom signature, notarized. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "From the box you gave my husband," I said, calmly stirring sugar into my coffee. "You should really be more careful with what you give away." My mother didn't speak for a full minute. That in itself was a small miracle. She always had something to say, some twist to spin, some way to flip the blame onto someone else. But not this time. She stared at the letter, then at me, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw something like fear flicker behind her polished expression. My father leaned back in his chair like he was trying to separate himself from the table, from her. From the whole mess unraveling in front of him. "You don't know what you're doing," he finally muttered. "Actually," I said, "I do." I reached into my bag and placed a second envelope on the table. "This one's going to your lawyer. Unless you want to negotiate." My voice didn't shake. I was calm, steady, surgical. Inside the second envelope were copies of all the property transfers they'd made illegally, including the trust fund my grandfather had intended for charity. The one they'd been draining slowly into personal accounts over the years. "Madeline," my mother said, her voice sharp like a piano string pulled too tight, "you're being dramatic." I smiled. "No, I'm being meticulous." She looked like she wanted to lunge across the table and slap me. Instead, she placed her wine glass down with a grace so rehearsed it made me sick. "And what exactly do you want?" My eyes didn't leave hers. "Everything that was mine to begin with. The property. The foundation. The trust. The watch was the start. The rest is coming home with me." My father scoffed, but quietly. My mother's jaw clenched, but she knew. They'd underestimated me. Again. I stood up. "I'll give you until Monday to sign over the documents." After that, the courts will see everything, including the copies already in my lawyer's hands. I didn't wait for their reply. I walked out of that cafe like I was walking out of a costume I'd worn too long, the obedient daughter, the quiet shadow, the girl who always played nice. That version of me was dead. And it felt incredible. I didn't cry until I got home. And they weren't tears of fear. They were release. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to them. I was the one making moves. And they were the ones stuck in place. They didn't call. Not that day, not the next. I half expected them to show up at our door, to send some guilt-laced email or voice message dripping with wounded innocence, but nothing came. The silence was louder than any screaming match we'd ever had. And I knew exactly what it meant. They were scrambling. Behind closed doors, my mother was probably digging through her files, trying to remember what she'd signed, what she hadn't. My father was likely shouting at some poor attorney, demanding damage control. But there wasn't much they could do. The paper trail was real, the documents were legal, and their lies had aged like milk, curdled, rotten, obvious. That weekend, Noah and I drove out to the property. My grandfather's land. It was just a few acres north of town, but standing there among the old trees, I felt like I was on a different planet. The wind sounded different. The sun hit my skin differently. Noah held my hand and said nothing, just squeezed it when he noticed my eyes welling up. I told him everything on the ride back. The watch, the will, the letters, the betrayal. He listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he said, "Whatever they took from you, we'll take it back." Not a yule, but a wheel. I didn't know I needed that until I heard it. Monday came, and just before noon, an email popped up. From my mother. No subject line. Just a PDF attached. I opened it slowly, not sure if it would be an apology or a threat. But it was neither. It was a scanned deed transfer. Signed. Notarized. Stamped. Everything I had demanded, returned. No note, no explanation. Just the document. A surrender. I should have felt victorious, but it was more complicated than that. It wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming pieces of myself they'd buried for years under manipulation, performance, and shame. They still hadn't said a word to me. But that was fine. I didn't need their voices anymore. I had my own. The next day, I opened the velvet drawer, took out the watch, and slipped it onto my wrist. It was a little loose, a little scratched, but it was mine. My grandfather had known what he was doing when he gave it to me. He'd known who they were. He'd seen them clearer than I ever could as a child. And somehow, even after death, he'd found a way to protect me. To remind me of who I was, and who I wasn't. The next few weeks passed quietly, at least on the surface. Noah and I settled into a rhythm, and from the outside, everything looked normal. But underneath, I was rebuilding something bigger, not just my legal standing, not just my family name, but my sense of safety. Of ownership. I went through every file in my possession, digital and paper, organizing, scanning, uploading everything into encrypted backups. I hired a financial advisor, someone completely outside my parents' network. I brought the deeds, the trust documents, everything my mother had tried to make disappear. The advisor's eyes widened. "You know," he said after the second meeting, "people get killed over less than this." I smiled. They'd never risk it. My parents only know how to manipulate, not murder. But even as I said it, I realized how much I believed it, and how that made them all the more dangerous. They were the kind of people who ruin you. In court, not in alleys. They used silence like a knife. Appearances as a shield. That was what made me different now. I wasn't afraid of what people would think anymore. I didn't need to protect their image. I let that go the day they gave away the watch. One afternoon, while going through old boxes my grandfather had left behind, I found a cassette tape. No label, no case. I had to borrow a player from a secondhand store just to hear it. The tape was grainy, the audio warped with age, but I recognized his voice instantly. He was reading from his own journal. "If you're hearing this, Maddie," he said, "it means they didn't burn it like they said they would." My stomach turned. I never trusted them with what mattered. Not your father. Not your mother. But I trusted you. You were the only one who didn't lie to me in the end. My hands were shaking as I listened. He talked about investments. Names, dates, all things I'd already uncovered. But at the end, his voice softened. "Don't just survive them," he said. "Beat them. Outlive the story they tried to write for you." I sat in my kitchen with tears streaming down my face, the tape still spinning in my hands. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a daughter. I felt like a legacy. I made a digital copy of the tape and sealed the original in a fireproof box along with the watch. Not because I was afraid someone would steal it again, no, those days were over. I just knew its value now wasn't sentimental. It was proof. Proof of who he saw me as. And proof of who they really were, even when no one else believed me. The next time I heard from my parents was in the form of a letter. Handwritten. Delivered by courier. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, embossed with my mother's initials, her way of pretending this was a civilized affair. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen counter, made tea, walked the dog, folded laundry. It sat there like a landmine with calligraphy on it. When I finally opened it, the handwriting was unmistakably hers, perfect, tight, deliberate. The first line read, "We're disappointed in how you've handled this. Not sorry. Not surprised. Just disappointed." The rest of the letter was a ballet of gaslighting, how we gave you everything, how you've misinterpreted so much, how we only ever wanted to protect you from your own impulsive choices. She even referred to my husband as the boy. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen. She hadn't changed. Not even in surrender. It wasn't a letter of reconciliation, it was a last attempt to reassert control. But she was too late. I placed the letter in the same fireproof box and locked it up, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. And that was the most important change of all. Their words didn't own me anymore. A week later, I filed paperwork to reopen my grandfather's charitable foundation, the one my mother had drained and hidden under fake shell companies. I hired an attorney to oversee its full restoration. Every dollar she'd stolen was going back where it belonged, to schools, to libraries, to women's shelters. She'd spent 10 years using that money to buy silence and status. I was going to use it to fund voices louder than hers ever were. When I told Noah, he just pulled me into a hug and whispered, "You're building something better." And for the first time in years, I believed that the official reopening of the foundation was quiet by design. No press release, no ribbon cutting, just a single notarized form, signed and submitted on a rainy Tuesday morning. It didn't need headlines. What mattered was the shift it created, like a silent fault line correcting itself under years of pressure. The very next day, I received a call from a former board member, a woman named Elaine whom I remembered vaguely from my childhood, always hovering in the background of photos, always kind but distant. "I heard what you did," she said. Her voice brittle but warm. He would have been proud. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I asked her, "Did you know what they were doing?" She hesitated. "We all suspected. But your mother, she was good at making people feel like they were imagining things." That didn't surprise me. My mother's greatest skill wasn't lying, it was making others question their own truth. And that's what I had spent most of my life unlearning. Elaine offered to help, quietly, discreetly, with rebuilding the board and tracking old donors. I accepted. Slowly, the foundation came back to life. I held the first real meeting in my own living room, with 3 women and 1 man, all of them older than me, all of them watching with quiet hope as I laid out the plan, no more backroom deals, no more vanity grants, only real work. Impact. Transparency. Justice. We named one of the new scholarships after my grandfather. Another after a librarian who'd mentored me when I was 15 and hiding in books to escape the Cold War of my own home. I didn't invite my parents to any of it. Not out of spite, but out of principle. They didn't get to rewrite their role now. They didn't get to pose for pictures or pretend they'd supported me all along. They could sit in their curated silence, behind curated smiles, in their curated world of carefully staged photos and filtered lives. I was done performing for them. One evening, as I walked through the new office space we'd just leased, I passed by the glass doors and saw my reflection, older, sharper, but softer too. And I realized, I didn't look like my mother. I didn't sound like my father. I looked like myself. And that was worth everything. A few days after the foundation's website went live, I received a package at my doorstep. No return address, no note, just a small black box wrapped in the same ivory paper my mother had used on Noah's birthday. My stomach dropped. I stood in the hallway staring at it for a long time, arms crossed, every nerve in my body alert. I didn't open it. Not yet. I brought it inside, set it down, and walked away. I made tea, answered emails, brushed the dog, folded laundry. It was hours before I finally sat on the couch and peeled the paper back, slow, mechanical, like disarming something that might explode. Inside was a pearl necklace. Real pearls. The kind my mother only wore for photographs or fundraisers. Alongside it, folded once, was a note in my father's handwriting. It said, "If you're going to play the part, you may as well look the part. We won't interfere again." That was it. No apology. No remorse. Just a concession wrapped in aesthetics. And that's exactly what it was, a costume piece from people who thought power came from appearances. I closed the box and never wore the necklace. I donated it to an art auction that funded local shelters. It sold for $9,800. The director of the shelter wrote me a letter. She said the funds would cover 3 months of food, emergency kits, and security improvements. 3 months of safety, paid for by a hollow gesture my parents hoped would buy their way back into the story. It didn't. I was rewriting it without them. The following week, I gave a small speech at the local library's restoration event, a quiet, rainy morning, barely 20 people in the room, but I spoke like it mattered. Because it did. Because every sentence I spoke, every dollar the foundation gave every woman who walked through those shelter doors, they were all bricks in a house I was building with my own hands. One my parents would never step foot in. And when I stepped down from the podium, a little girl ran up to me. She couldn't have been more than 8. She said, "Are you the lady who made the books come back?" I nodded. She smiled. "Thank you." That was it. That was the moment. That was the revenge. The morning of my birthday, Noah made me pancakes and coffee and gave me a card he'd drawn himself, a silly sketch of me holding a sword, standing on top of a hill labeled Truth. I laughed so hard I cried. Not because it was perfect. But because it was real. Honest. Nothing about it was performative or conditional. And for the first time in my life, my birthday wasn't tangled up in someone else's expectations. That same afternoon, I drove out to the old property. My grandfather's land. I walked the perimeter, let the wind tangle my hair, stood under the tall oaks and remembered the way he used to sit in the shade, polishing that old watch with a cloth and humming like he knew something no one else did. I wore the watch that day. I wear it often now. Not as a trophy. Not as a warning. But as a reminder that love doesn't have to come with strings. That silence doesn't mean peace. That just because someone raised you doesn't mean they built you. I built myself. From ash and glass and the sharp corners of letters they thought I'd never read. And what they don't understand, what they'll never understand, is that by giving away what was never theirs to give, they handed me the key to everything. Their cruelty became my clarity. Their lies became my blueprint. And their silence became the loudest confession of all. I don't hate them. I don't need to. What I have now is better. A life where I don't flinch when the phone rings. A home where every corner is mine, not a stage. A voice that doesn't ask for permission before speaking. They can keep their pearls, their letters, their curated apologies. I have the watch. I have the land. I have the truth. And I'm not giving any of it back.